Hello everybody, I am going to give you an update about what I'm doing with my knee that had incredible instability after Lyme disease, with Lyme disease, and in the recovery thereafter. So in the fall of 2014, I got bitten by a tick, and that was a heck of a journey, which I've written about a number of times, so I won't go through in painstaking detail here. But it left me with a number of crippling issues that have continued more or less to this day, some better, some about the same, none really worse than then, thank goodness. But one of the remaining issues is the right knee. My right knee became very unstable somewhere in that October, I believe it was, of 2014. And I'd been into rock climbing at the time. I'd sort of deviated from my typical lifting schedules and doing lots of structural lifts and the experiments I do with that I've returned to since. And I first discovered it in some of the climbing positions, because you have to contort your body up to a point depending on the level at which you're climbing. And if I would reach for a very high hold with my right foot and be sort of sideward, didn't even necessarily need to be that way, I suppose, when trying to climb up, and put pressure on that foot, I would find that there was a transition point where the femur and the tibia and fibula had some sort of malalignment, and I would get this big clunk, this big knee locking, well, it would break through the lock into the unlock very painfully. That's where I first noticed it, and I tried to avoid that position as much as I could, which then led me away from climbing, which was sad. I had fallen in love with it, but not really being able to use your leg for a lot of the big reaches, there's all kinds of climbs you can't really, levels you can't really climb anymore. So I did what I could, long story short, over the next few years, with varying degrees of success. And I returned to strengthening. I did various kinds of mobility work. I worked with ARP Wave for a little while. I met with different kinds of physical therapists. I had it imaged. And as far as we can tell, there's no major cartilage deformities that weren't already present prior. Actually, my left knee is the one that had a beak nose tear in the meniscus many years ago. And up to the current day, starting about a year and a half, 2 years ago, I decided I would really work on mobility work. So I would really start doing squatting, starting first at a shallow depth, a very high height, where I knew I wouldn't get the knee locking. Right around that time, I was figuring out some stabilizing pressures to work on my particular kind of knee lock. And at that time, that was the last time that I had a major knee locking episode, which that one I incited myself in order to upload a YouTube video to show people that you don't necessarily need to get meniscus tear surgery when you're having this symptom. That's the typical fallback for a lot of clinicians, unfortunately, is that will have to be a meniscus repair. And in some cases that's true, but most cases it isn't. And if you look at efficacy studies on knee surgery in general, outcomes are anywhere between so-so and abysmal. And that wasn't really an option for me anyway. In my imaging, there's like little nicks and stuff. You get, anybody who's not been in a bubble is gonna have various kinds of degeneration. That is just how life goes. That is really interesting in pain studies, because you'll find that there are some people who have incredible deterioration in imaging who are pain-free or incident-free or symptom-free otherwise. And we didn't know this before, because the only people we imaged were the people who were in pain. So we saw somebody in back pain, we do an MRI, we see a disc that appears to be protruding, bulging, herniated, what have you, and we say, oh, okay, that must be causal, until we started imaging healthy backs, people who were asymptomatic or pain-free, and we found the same kind of degeneration. And in fact, there's lots of studies about resorption of these bulge discs. Well, the knee, it turns out, is very similar, where you will have these overt deformities in the knee cartilage or in the other connective tissue surrounding it, and in some cases there's just spontaneous resolving without any interventions or very limited physical therapy interventions. So regardless, in my case, there wasn't anything that really stuck out as necessitates high-level intervention, surgical intervention. And thank God that the cortisone injections of 1,000 years ago in the medieval ages are beginning to go away, because the anti-inflammatory, I couldn't do it anyway because I had Lyme disease, the anti-inflammatory agent of cortisone amplifies instability. So you have to always think about structural, the joints, any joints throughout the body need a certain balance of mobility versus stability. Okay, you want commensurate. Depending on your sport, you might want to go, super commensurate or sub-commensurate in one of those domains. And this is where people with incredible laxity of tissue are probably the ones who need to go the most into the strengthening realm, not into the stretching realm. But people play to their strengths. So you'll have people who have hyperextensibility of tissue, and they trend towards certain long pose yoga practices that are in fact worsening the joints prospects. Flow, the vinyasa and some of the other forms of yoga, perfectly fine for those people. For the most part, they want to avoid extreme angles because they already have laxity of tissue, and they're just making it more lax and more lax and more lax, which is structural instability. At some point, you have to put progressive loads, strengthening, lifting, into that structure if you want to make it more stable. And going back to my story with my knee, I didn't have these big overt issues. I don't have hyperextensibility, although in that structure I did. For whatever reason in the knee, my right knee joint, I have Cirque du Soleil-like instability, hypermobility. And down into the joint capsule or somewhere in the joint itself, the surrounding tissue is somewhat stabilizing, very strong now, but I started on this journey 18 months, 2 years ago, to figure out counter pressures or stabilizing pressures in order to be able to do that more extreme knee flexion that incited, or first showed me, it didn't really foment the locking, but it showed me that there was going to be this locking underneath the surface. So I wanted to get to those depths, I wanted to get to those ranges again with sans locking. And I endeavored on that journey. I worked on different kinds of counter pressures and tensions. I found that if I really contracted through soleus, through the hamstring complex, I could generally go to an increasingly deeper and deeper and deeper squat under light loads or just body weight without the locking, or very like a minimal approach towards what used to be painful locking. And so I just kept working that and working that and working that and working that. And I then discontinued lower body training, maybe like once a week or every 2 weeks, last summer, spring, summer, fall, in order to train for this thing I was doing with pull-ups, and then subsequently just showing up untrained for the Twin Cities Marathon. I'm clearly not a runner at 240, or at the time I was maybe 230 or so. And then after that, this last fall, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna get this thing as strong as I possibly can. So I've been endeavoring since around November, so November, December, January, February, March, April, May. We just wrapped up, today's June 1st. And I've recovered, not my all-time greatest lower body strength. There was a time years ago where I got up to 287 pounds or so, and I could do rack deadlifts for high reps with almost 700 pounds, and super heavy squats and whatnot. There was a point where I was pretty light, almost down around 200 pounds, when I was first hitting my 500 pound deadlifts from the floor, and I'm heavier than that now, so you have to factor in relative strength index and whatnot. But certainly on things like split stance, I'm at absolute strongest, for sure, ever. I got up almost to 500 pounds, around somewhere between 450 and 470, I can't recall now, on Bulgarian split stance in the Hatfield variant. My hips are strong, my knees are strong, quads are strong, glute complex, glute max, glute med, glute minimus, down into the deep rotators, obturator, internus, externus, gemellus, superior, inferior. I got great strength in there. I've got great mobility in there. I can do a back fold. I haven't trained for it, but I believe I could do a back walkover. And bridging is easy for me, and rock bottom squat with weight. But there's still, so I got very strong. I built a lot, so they're thinking about these joint structures, how there needs to be mobility paired with stability, right? We don't just want hyperextensibility. Those are the people who they're doing too much yoga, or they're doing the cortisone injections. They're increasing laxity of tissue. And like I said, thank goodness I avoided that. That would have actually worsened the structures dramatically, because it makes things more lax. So then you're going to have the joint rapidly degenerate. Okay, we want to go in the other direction. We want to create stability, and that therefore necessitates the opposite of cortisone injections, the opposite of long-held pose yoga. So strengthening and these regenerative therapies, which have a tiered system you could sort of break down to prolotherapy, PRP, stem cell. And we did do a PRP prolo injection on this knee after I'd gained a lot of stability at the OrthoCure clinic in Minnesota here with Dr. Ron Hansen. And he is by far the best clinician for these regenerative therapies in the Midwest, probably the country. He was one of the first practitioners in the US, since we're so far behind the curve on this stuff versus the rest of the world. We all got bogged down with the embryonic stem cell moral debate back in the 90s, waylaying a lot of research, not even realizing that was a moot point. Autologous stem cells from self-derived are probably the only thing that really do anything without the risk of wanton cancer growths and whatnot. The umbilical derived cells, I don't want to go all over the place, but the umbilical derived cells, which many clinics are doing for $10,000, $15,000 per injection, they still don't have any good data supporting that they are living cells or viable. It would be great, I know it's a great hope, but the fact of the matter is autologous is the only thing that has hard data behind it. And I've seen some pretty crazy outcomes with people simply just regrowing structures in the body from this. So I went through my whole journey, strengthened, mobilized, got to these depths, but still the knee locking, or at least the sort of beginnings of it, would be incurred when I would do rapid movement. So if I'm in frontal plane or transverse plane, heavy loading, or even switching directions or things of that nature, athletic movements, I'm pretty good. The knee is very good. If you image it, it looks like a very healthy knee, but there's something in the ligamentous structures and/or in the joint capsule that still kind of just rocks around, especially with sagittal movement. If I go on, off, so the rotational sort of stuff, the knee, there will be a malalignment, tibia and fibula versus femur. So I wanted to get this figured out. I got very strong, I got mobile, I did what I could. We did an injection on this knee. I can't remember how long ago that was now, maybe a year now. And that helped a lot. That helped me get to now do these things, these deficit sissy squats, which are extreme knee quad loading in an extreme knee flexed position. And likewise, I can do full bridge, and I can sit back on my shins, these positions that I've been avoiding for years, for 4 years. And so what else could we do but go from Prolo and PRP to stem cell, which we did yesterday. So this is sort of the first in the series of videos I'll do, walking through hopefully the final recovery with this, and share that with people so that we can reduce the number of futile knee surgical procedures out there, which if you go through the literature, and I can upload links, I've already talked about this on the blog before, so this is not my opinion, this is AMA, looking through JAMA, New England Medical Journal and whatnot. Outcomes with knee surgeries are, like I said, somewhere between so-so and abysmal. Some people, there are knee replacement surgeries and there are arthroscopic surgeries where they clean them out and people feel awesome. But with this knee locking, which is frankly often just misdiagnosed as some sort of meniscus tear or deformity that needs surgical intervention, most people, it's the vast majority, I don't remember the stat right now, that don't have a beneficial outcome. And it's extremely costly for all of us, really, because then it gets factored into premiums and everything else. So we need to start changing conversation, and it is towards regenerative therapies as opposed to some of these surgical interventions and cortisone injections, these things that in 15, 20 years we're gonna laugh about like trepanning. They're just gonna seem like archaic, barbaric techniques because of the regenerative therapies that are forthcoming. We now look back at at probably as late as the 50s, where you had medical doctors recommending menthol cigarettes for asthma and different kinds of breathing, respiratory duress to alleviate it. So, we have these paradigm shifts. That wasn't that long ago. And I think the knee surgeries, and certainly the cortisone injections, that one's kind of interesting that's still lagging. We're really not doing anybody any favors with cortisone injection, for the most part. All right, so we did this injection yesterday, and we'll see. My knee is very tight, very sore right now. I have some morphine in me, which I hate, but I had to do it to curb the edge to make it through the night, and then I still didn't sleep great, and in part why I'm doing this video right now at 4 a.m. on a Saturday. But basically the way the procedure went is Dr. Hansen, Ron Hansen, again, look him up. He's tip of the spear. He's the cutting edge person in this domain. You're almost wasting your time even meeting with anybody else. There are a lot of people who could do some of the Prolo, maybe even some of the PRP, but if you want to do stem cell, you're wasting your time doing UDC with these clinicians who've just kind of started at this because it's a money-making game. He is teaching other clinicians the techniques, hundreds of them. So at least do yourself a favor of meeting with him. Don't be a fool and go to some place that's just going to pump a bunch of dead cells in you, hoping to restore you. There might still be placebo effect, though. Anyway, so the procedure yesterday, we drew my blood to centrifuge it down, get all the growth factors really condensed, and we then cored out through my pelvis bone marrow to get the stem cells out. And I'm a very fortunate person because I take really good care of myself, and so according to the clinic, the doctor there and his staff, a few nurses, I had the best samples they had ever seen. And he said normally he's got to do multi-site draw to get enough marrow, and he had more than he could fit into the knee joint from the first attempt. It was like a 6-inch, I think it was I don't know what gauge, hollow point. They core, it's pretty intense. They core through your pelvic, I think the iliac, I can't tell, it seems kind of central, and pull this marrow, and they have to process it in their lab, super high-tech lab. I don't know what the cost on that thing is, but it's like walking into something at a university's science research laboratory. And they get all the growth factors they can with the stem cells, and then we went in and we injected the LCL, the MCL. You can't with ultrasound well see ACL, PCL, so you have to do approximations. That's the other thing I want to draw people's attention to. If you're considering doing this, this is, as far as I know, the only person who has this much experience doing ultrasound and fluoroscopy guided injections, Prolo and PRP and stem cell, and there's a variety of other things that he's doing that don't neatly fall under those three headings because he's always coming up with new techniques. Anyhow, so we do these injections yesterday, and into the joint capsule was the bolus of the stem cells, and healthy, viable ones from me, so there will be no tissue rejection, and I'm not going to grow any weird tissue in there. And it's incredibly painful because you have to understand, again, this mobility versus stability thing. There's going to be, to really have cure for orthopedic issues, it essentially has to get worse before it gets better. This is a difficult thing for people to wrap their heads around. It was difficult for me, my paradigm shift, to essentially seek pain as a directive of growth. That isn't always the case, mind you, but in the regenerative therapies, that is what's going on. You're trying to incite inflammation, you're trying to have growth, and there's this pain elicited from it that's crazy. We did my supraspinatus PRP a few years ago, which ended years of neck issues and radiating nerve pain. I actually had temporary paralysis after Lyme disease in my left arm. I couldn't use my left arm. I was doing physical therapy, but is no fault of the physical therapist, but I was doing physical therapy and it already kind of been triggered, came to a head, and I had this paralysis through my left side. Well, I met with this clinician not too long after that. This was a few years ago, and I've had no neck issues, no rotator cuff issue on the left side. I can do very heavy pressing and pulling and overhead position stuff I couldn't do before. So I've had really good outcomes. I've seen really good outcomes. They have a great reputation there. At least meet with them if you're considering doing something like this. Ortho cure, I can put it in the notes. And this knee, we don't know yet. We injected it, it moves, but we're still in sort of that first tier of, pain response. My hope is that the sagittal movement instability that was still there will be gone. It's very frustrating because though I'm extremely strong and I've created a lot of stability there and I've done everything I can that I know of on the corrective exercise side, that sagittal movement, you know, to do something like soccer or to juggle a ball, I'm like, okay, you know, I'm okay at doing some of the tricks with juggling. And to do that, you have to kind of turn off, turn on. So you go lax at the leg, then you contract at the leg to kick the ball repeatedly. And so that movement, the twisting movement on off, that's sort of rapid, plyometric in some cases, that malaligns me at the joint without any warning signs. So that will be the true test, because it's really the last bastion of the last holdout on this knee instability. But right now, my knee is swollen big time. Mostly, some of it you can see visibly. I took some pictures which I'll upload. My back is okay, where we cored out the stem cell, or the marrow, to derive the stem cells. So this is the beginning. This is the beginning of the uploads about this. I'm going to do longer videos, so I'll use YouTube as the platform for these ones. I've had a lot of people reach out through my first video that I didn't think anything of about the knee lock, and I'm almost 100%, folks. I mean, I'm totally functional if it isn't rapid rotational movement through the knee. I don't get the lock anymore. I can sit however, I can do whatever. So this last piece will be, can I move rapidly through full ranges of motion and rotationally? That is, can I reacquire high-level athleticism in all planes of movement and in all domains? And that, if I can, I believe anybody can, and it will certainly bode well to change the expectation from just getting out of pain. I know a lot of people saw the first video because they're in pain. I mean, frankly, a lot of people reach out to me because they're in pain, emotionally, psychologically, physically. However, they reach out to me through coaching on the exercise side of the equation, or the nutrition side of the equation, or just mindset side, because they're in pain. We deal with a lot of pain. People deal with a lot of pain in relationships and in life and in business and in the orthopedic realm. And I'm just a guy. I'm no crazy expert, but I have worked with thousands and thousands of people, so I have some experience to lend to people. We'll see how this knee journey goes. For me, I'll keep you guys updated. Very hopeful. And I don't know how long it'll be until I can return to heavy work. I'm about to try some light cycling. I can walk on it okay already today, despite the pain. And we're only, 12 to 14 hours after 13 hours after procedure, whatever it is. Which, when we did my shoulder, that was not the case. I was debilitated the next day. And I'm gonna do some light cycling today, and then hopefully next week I can try some of the moderate strength training. And then we'll start testing the deficit sissy squats again, where I go into that loaded extreme knee flexion. And then if all of that is holding up well, then we'll try some bouts of soccer ball juggling. That really seems to be the one that most reliably produces the negative outcome. And so if I can return to that in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and there's little to no issue, then this is a great therapy that people want to consider, even when it's a long existing injury, even when it's something that, according to your mindset or somebody's opinion, is only a candidate for surgical intervention. There is another way. These regenerative therapies are coming down the pipeline whether you want to face the future or not, time is moving forward, even though a lot of people want to be Luddites and move backward. I believe we're actually going to get to the point where with stem cell, autologous stem cell, we'll be done with all the classical surgical interventions. I really do think we're going to get to that point where we're gonna laugh about it the same way we do the smoking recommendations from medical doctors from a bygone era, or the trepanning, the drilling holes in people's heads to cure colds and whatnot from the medieval period. I think we're going to view knee replacement surgery, meniscus surgeries, rotator cuff surgeries, a whole host of them that way pretty soon. I think that it's consensus even in these artifacts, these people who are high-level specialists, but they're hearkening to some age that's no longer around. Even among them, I think it's consensus that things like type 1 diabetes, we're basically done. You know, we're going to grow the islet cells or a new pancreas for people with type 1 diabetes with stem cell, and it'll be autologous, so there will be no tissue rejection. We're going to get to the point probably where we can do it with cardiac tissue. It has been done that we've effectively regrown a heart from stem cells, cultured stem cells. The liver, kidneys will be done with, you know, organ donors. You'll just grow them. You'll have them on hand. It'll be part of your insurance policy. And it sounds like sci-fi still to some people, but some of it's already been done. I think the kidneys have been done, the pancreas has been done, the heart's been done, so we'll get to lungs. There's a good body of evidence that we're going to get there with dopamine, dopaminergic cells, dopamine receptor cells, in the substantia nigra in the brain for people with Parkinson's. We'll just not even worry about the Lewy body accumulation on the old ones, and we'll just put new ones in. So we're doing that with my knee right now, and I'll keep you updated, show you what the function is over the course of the next couple of weeks. And if you have additional questions about it, reach out to me. If it's something you're considering doing, look up OrthoCure, look up Dr. Ron Hansen. Don't go to these clinics. He's got, I don't even know what it is now, 15 years or something like that. He's like the first person in the U.S., one of the first people in the U.S. to do this. Started that clinic out in Colorado where he was on the doctors on television. Don't go to these pop-up shops and get blinded by the light where they're over-promising and under-delivering with the UDC stuff and everything else. You know, it's still quite, even internal studies, so places that's their brand and they're trying to bolster their procedure with their own internal study, their own internal research, even there, it's questionable. Autologous, we see some pretty crazy outcomes. I have a client who effectively regrew part of her hamstring from a long existing injury in her 60s. And it might take more procedures with somebody who's really weak or somebody who doesn't have a lot of healthy constituent growth factors and whatnot underneath the surface. Sure, it might take more procedures, more effort, but we're gonna see some pretty wild outcomes, and I will share mine and keep you guys updated.